So this is Light of Truth Day. This is why I've got my special, not just my poncho on, but this is my twice a year shirt. I wear it on our holidays. We have two center holidays. The Light of Truth is in midsummer, and the Light of Love, which we celebrate in winter on actually December 25th, coincidentally with Christmas. But anyway, these are our two holidays. And these holidays reflect the two great principles that govern all mystical paths anyway, and that is to seek truth and cultivate selfless love and compassion. And the reason they go together is because the truth that mystics discover is a truth of selflessness, and love and compassion are, if they're true love and compassion, they're selfless. So selfless love and compassion is simply the truth in action. So we're putting into action what we discover in terms of realization. So the truth is selflessness, but it's actually the truth of the ultimate nature of reality, which is the ultimate nature of ourselves. And this is selflessness, as I said, but it's not just a word. It's something to actually be directly discovered through a way of knowing that is beyond our normal ways of knowing. And various traditions have different names for it. In the Hindus call it jnana. In Islam, it's called marifa. In Zen, they call it satori or kensho. Christians call it union. Various traditions have various terms for it. So what is this thing? Well, in the West, we call it enlightenment or realization or awakening. Those are common names in the West. But what can we say anything about it? Well, it's easier to say what it's not actually. And it's not conceptual knowledge, any form of conceptual knowledge. And this is very important to understand. Your mind is going to try to figure it out anyway. That's what the mind does. But if you know from the beginning, from the get-go, that isn't going to do it, then that'll protect you from landing on some big intellectual insight and thinking, aha, that's it. It's not. And let me just read you one quote from one tradition, the ancient Hindu Upanishads. They say of Brahman's their name for the ultimate reality. He comes to the thought of those who know him beyond thought, not to those who imagine he can be attained by thought. He is unknown, he is known in the ecstasy of an awakening, which opens the door of life eternal. So ecstasy of an awakening that opens the door of life eternal. That is not just the intellectual figuring out something. Well, then you might think that there must be some sort of very profound experience. And in fact, mystics often will talk about enlightenment as a kind of experience, because in some ways it's closer to experience. It has the intimacy of experience that usually intellectual conceptual knowledge doesn't have. But it is actually not experiential knowledge in the normal way we have experiences. And here's what the 20th century Zen master Suzuki Roshi says about this. We talk about enlightenment as experience, but it's not some experience we will have in terms of good or bad, time or space, past or future. It is experience or a consciousness beyond those distinctions or feelings. So non-dual, something about it, it's beyond all these distinctions that our language, our thoughts create. And so our normal experiences, we think, well, it took place in time. It was here. I had this experience today. It was a wonderful experience, but now what do? Let's go get a pizza, So, but enlightenment's not that. It's not some experience that comes and goes and passes in time. And then all mystics agree that because it's beyond these distinctions, actually it's ineffable. We can't say what it is. Even if you really wanted to, you couldn't. The words will not express it directly. And this is why the great Sufi Rabia, she was an early Sufi. Sufis, by the way, the mystics of Islam, if you don't know. And here's what she says about this, very simply. She says, the one who tastes knows. The one who explains lies. And I think she's a bit harsh there, actually. If someone tries to explain enlightenment and claims that this explanation is complete and absolute, and this is the only explanation or something, that is either that person doesn't know what they're talking about or it's a lie. That's true. But explanations, accounts of awakening and so forth can be helpful if we take them as the Buddhists say, fingers pointing to the moon. You want to show somebody where the moon is, you point your finger at it and, hopefully direct their attention to the moon. And as the Buddhists always warn, though, don't fixate on the finger. Because the finger is just an instrument to get you to the moon. So there's a danger in teachings, actually, because we tend to fixate on the teaching and not use the teaching as that kind of pointer. But if we avoid that trap, it can be very useful, very helpful. And that's what we're going to be doing this morning. I'm going to read you 6 fingers, accounts of awakening, pointing to the moon of enlightenment, and see what we can glean from that for our own practice, how we can use it practically, okay? So we'll start with this account by Ayua. He was an Igloolik Eskimo, lived at the turn of the 20th century, and he reported this to a Danish explorer, Knud Rasmussen. And so this is Knud Rasmussen's translation of what he said and coming back to us. And the background is that Ayua had wanted to be a shaman. And he really wanted to be a shaman. And he went out and he visited all these shamans and he gave them expensive gifts and he did whatever they told him to do and so forth. And nothing worked. He couldn't attain shamanhood, if you like. So he went into solitude. And now in his own words, this is what he says happened, okay? Then I sought solitude. And here I soon became very melancholy. Then for no reason, all would suddenly be changed. And I felt a great inexplicable joy, a joy so powerful that I could not restrain it, but had to break into song. And then in the midst of that, such a mysterious and overwhelming delight, I became a shaman, not knowing myself how it came about. But I was a shaman. I could see and hear in a totally different way. I had gained my kamanek, my enlightenment, my shaman light of brain and body. And this in such a manner that it was not only I who could see through the darkness of life, but the same light also shone out for me, imperceptible to human beings, but visible to all the spirits of the earth and the sky and the sea. Chills. So, what can we notice about this? Well, first of all, solitude. Ayua experiences, he has this sense of failure and like exhaustion. He's tried all this stuff. He feels like he's in this dark night and nothing's worked. And so he seeks out solitude. And that's very common, by the way, the sense of a failure before enlightenment dawns, preceding that. But he seeks out solitude. And this, he's following an archetypal pattern for spiritual paths. This withdrawal from society and then return. Withdrawal and then gaining your enlightenment or whatever wisdom you get, and then returning with it as a gift to the community. Joseph Campbell writes about this beautifully in the book, The Hero's Journey, if you want to follow that up. And then this is very characteristic of spiritual journeys and also the journeys of founders of traditions. So the archetypal exemplars, like Moses, Moses went up to Mount Horeb to meet God for the first time. And the Hindu rishis, the seers of India, they went into the forests and into the mountains to to bring back and they would put the jnana knowledge, the enlightened knowledge of the ultimate reality of Brahman. And then there's, of course, Buddha going under the Bodhi tree, and withdrawing from his palace, his community, and Jesus going into the desert for 40 days before he goes on his mission. And Muhammad goes retreated to this cave on Mount Hira. That's where he first started receiving the Quran. But he would leave the village, he'd leave the community and go up to the mountain and just retreat into this cave. So these are like exemplars, archetypal exemplars of how this pattern works. And this is what spiritual students of the spiritual traditions have been doing all along. That's why we go on retreat, go away for a week or whatever, and even just doing a meditation practice where you take 20 minutes and you're going on a little withdrawal and a little return. You withdraw, you get quiet, you turn off your cell phones and all the distractions and so forth. So this pattern of withdrawal and return is deeply set into spiritual traditions and spiritual paths. So we see that right away from Ayua's account here. Then his enlightenment comes suddenly, and he doesn't even know how it happens. So it's not something he does. It doesn't come by an act of will or volition. It comes by what we'd say in the theistic traditions, by grace. So he's open to it. He's put himself in this position, but it's not something he actually does. And then he describes this. He sees life clearly for the first time. This isn't just a little aha about one aspect, but the whole, he sees the darkness of life completely transparently. An illumination is kamanek, is enlightenment. Illumination, that's a metaphor that you use in all the traditions, this sudden illumination. So we get some clues here about how radical this is. This is not just another experience we have, good or bad or whatever. It's something that cuts through all that, all those distinctions. So then, and extrapolating from Ayua, he lived in, I said, the early part of the 20th century, but he lived in a hunter-gatherer culture, and we presume that, we guess that this is the way our earliest ancestors lived, before the dawn of history. And it may well be that his enlightenment is the core of shamanism, the current that runs through shamanism, and that began before, they say, the dawn of history. Not that all shamans are enlightened, by the way, any more than all priests are enlightened or whatever. But if we start tracing it back, there is no beginning that we can pinpoint, say, oh, Buddha was the first one to get enlightened or something like that. So our ancestors run deep, very, very deep. So, which brings us to the second account, the second finger pointing to the moon. And this is by very old, one of the first actually written accounts that we do have historically, by Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is the legendary founder of Taoism. People put his dates, he's not really, he can't be pinpointed as a historical figure, but somewhere around 500 BC is a common date that I've read, that people imagine that this it might be several people who wrote the Tao Te Ching, the early book of Taoism, so we don't really know, but it's attributed to Lao Tzu. Anyway, somebody did say this, and this is what they said. This is what happened. He says, I hold firmly to stillness. The myriad creatures all rise together. And I got to stop here because, as I said, the myriad creatures aren't just little squirrels and butterflies and stuff. It's a Chinese idiom that means all phenomena, the myriad things, the 10,000 things is another idiom like that. So he's watching everything, sights, sounds, smells, everything that surrounds all the myriad creatures. So I hold firmly to stillness. The myriad creatures all rise together, and I watch their return. The teeming creatures all return to their roots. Returning to one's root is known as stillness. This is what is meant by returning to one's original nature. Returning to one's original nature is known as the eternal. Knowledge of the eternal is known as illumination. There's that illumination. So notice it begins, I hold firmly to stillness. So no doubt he's off in solitude, someplace meditating. He's not doing this, in the streets of Beijing with the donkey carts going by and the sellers hawking their wares. I assume he's not doing it there anyway. He's becoming very still, undistracted, and he's just watching all the phenomena experience arise and how they return, arise and return. So, from where do they arise and to where do they return? That's what he's talking about. This is the whole key, the secret here. Well, let's illustrate this. I'm going to ring this gong. The ringing gong, the ringing of the gong is one of the myriad creatures. Now, it's not ringing yet, is it? So where does it come from? Okay, here we go. Where did it go? It comes from what? Silence, stillness, nothing. I mean, before it rang, it wasn't there, it was nothing. And then where did it go? Back to nothing. And that nothing is eternal. Listen, it's still here. You see, that nothingness of that ring is still here. It'll always be here. If I do this again, now this is a different ring, a different creature. You see, it comes from the same nothing and it goes back to the same nothing. Now you check this out in your own experience, like Lao Tzu, in your own meditation. All the phenomena, all the myriad creatures, they come from, he calls it stillness, nothing, and they go back, and that is eternal. Now, interesting, this insight is known in other traditions, not just Taoism. We associate it with Taoism because he's got such an explicit meditation practice to do. But here's the Rabbi Joseph ben Shalom of Barcelona, a 14th century Kabbalist. 14th century Kabbalist on the other side of the world. And here's what he says. In every transformation of reality, in every change of form, or every time the stature of a thing is altered, the abyss of God's nothingness is crossed, and for a fleeting mystical moment becomes visible. He never read Lao Tzu. How does he know that? This is what we mean at the center when we say, if you read the mystics, the core teachings, not all of everything that they've ever said, but the core teachings, they're the same. Not only are they the same, but they're their own instructions. They say, you go check it out for yourself. Here's the way to do it. Don't take my word for it. So the question is, why don't we notice? If every time a thing is changes, alters, comes and goes, it's the eternal is there. Why don't we ever notice it? And the answer is we're too busy. We're too distracted by our own thoughts or activities or plans or dreams or memories or that or that. the story of I, the grasping, the pushing away, just totally wrapped up in all this stuff. You never stop to rest in that stillness, as Lao Tzu did. So this brings me to the third pointing finger, which is that of the 17th century Christian mystic, Teresa of Avila, or Avila. And she became a nun early in life. And so she spent most of her life in quasi-solitude in these monasteries. Actually, later in life, she became an abbess, and she was very busy, and she was a reformer and traveled all over Spain and whatnot. But nevertheless, she was always had time during the day, because she lived a monastic life, to be in the stillness, the silence, to practice. So she, and then she talks about the spiritual journey as an interior journey where we go deeper and deeper inside our own selves. And she compares this to a castle. She wrote a book called Interior Castles. And here's what she says about that. The door of entry into this castle is prayer and meditation. So again, this is what Lao Tzu was doing, the importance of meditation, of finding that stillness, of finding that silence, of not being distracted. And her goal is not just to hear the silence, the nothingness between phenomena and so forth. It's really to have no distractions at all, to be so open, so undistracted, that everything that happens, there's no hanging on to anything. It just comes and goes, and there's this great sense of emptiness. And here's what she writes about that. It is quite certain, then we empty ourselves of all that is creature and rid ourselves of it for the love of God, that same Lord will fill our souls with himself. Empty ourselves of all that is creature. So it's interesting she uses creature here. I'm sure this is a linguistic coincidence, because this is translated from Spanish, the other translation from Chinese Mandarin. So, but nevertheless, when we let all this stuff go and we become empty, then God, we don't grab God, God fills us with himself or herself. But before this happened to her, or as she was doing these practices to try to attain this self-emptiness, she went through a lot of dark nights and periods of aridity and so forth. Some of them lasted for years. But she persevered, and this is what she writes about. Finally, she attains union with the divine. And here's how she describes it. The instantaneous communication of God to the soul is so great a secret and so sublime a favor and such a delight is felt by the soul that I do not know with what to compare it to. Beyond saying that as far as one can understand, the soul, I mean the spirit of the soul, is made one with God. It is as if a tiny streamlet enters the sea from which it will find no way of separating itself, or as if in a room there were two large windows through which the light streamed in. It enters in different places, but it all becomes one. So again, like Ayua, this communication happens instantaneously, suddenly, and it doesn't come by self-will. It actually comes by the opposite, emptying yourself of self-will. And so it comes by grace. And then, of course, it's accompanied by great delight, joy, bliss. And then she uses the metaphor of light. It's like light just illuminated. So it's important, though, to understand that this state of self-emptying, kenosis, as we call it around here, and there are different traditions that have different words for it, samadhi and things like that, that itself is not union. That itself is not enlightenment. That state will pass. That state will go. Enlightenment does not pass. And this is what Teresa goes on to say about this. It must not be thought that the faculties and senses and passions are always in this state of peace, though the soul itself is. This center of our soul or spirit is something difficult to describe, and indeed is difficult to believe how the soul can have trials and afflictions and yet still be in peace. So this is a really important warning, because if we try to cling to the bliss or get stuck in this state of emptiness, then as Zen Master Sun Tzu used to say, not even the Buddha can save you. But if we let go of this burst of bliss, and if we don't try to cling to this state where of complete undistraction and so forth, we're trying to hang on to something, then we discover this amazing thing. Like she says, it's hard to describe. It's hard to even believe that even though you can have outer difficulties and conflicts, and you have emotions and all the normal human stuff, that unshakable core of consciousness of your true nature is peace. Not a dancing around, always kind of energetic peace. That happens too, but a deep, deep contentment, abiding happiness, it's often put. So, and then this surpasses anything else you could want, really. And that's why Teresa and herself writes, in short, the desires of these souls are no longer for consolations or favors, for they have with them the Lord himself, and it is his majesty who now lives in them. So her search for happiness is over with this instantaneous communication, this union with the divine. And this is a good sign that the path is over. If your search for happiness is over, if there's nothing more you want in terms of way of happiness, you got it, then that means your path is done. You still might want to meditate, you still might want to do practice and so forth, but it's not because you're trying to gain anything. It may be, like in my case, I continued a lot of practices because I had very few practices before I woke up. And so people were asking me to teach, and I didn't know what to teach anybody. And so I didn't want to teach people something I didn't do myself. So I did all kinds of practices to see how they worked. And I was quite fascinating, curious. I was glad I did it. But it's not out of any grasping, trying to attain something. So then this brings us to the fourth pointing finger, which is of Ibn Arabi, who is a great Sufi of the 14th century. And Ibn Arabi was not a monastic. Excuse me. In Islam, they don't believe in monasticism, but he did attain his enlightenment, or his opening, as he calls it, on retreat in solitude. And here's what he says. I began my retreat at the first light, and I had reached opening before sunrise. So actually right away, almost. First light is, the first light of dawn, and then sunrise is the full thing. So what's an hour or two? So he went in the retreat, and boom, within an hour or so, he woke up, he had opening. After that, I entered the shining of the full moon and other stations, and one after another. I stayed in my place for 14 months. Through that, I gained all the mysteries which I put down in writing after opening. So he had a very interesting path. Firstly, he was a very young man. They described he didn't even have a beard yet when he had this experience of opening. I shouldn't say experience of opening. He had this opening. And this was it for him, by the way. And he did other retreats, and he had all sorts of other spiritual journeys, and things happened to him. The rest of his life, it was like this opening opened this door to all these other kinds of insights, particularly into the Quran and the Hadith and the literature of Islam and the Islamic cosmology, how it all sprang from this ground. And that's what he wrote about, and just beautifully. You have to take the time to learn something about Islam. You don't have to become an expert, because it's all full of Islamic symbols and phrases and so forth. Like this, he entered the shining of the full moon at some particular station, the different stations Sufis go through. So in a certain sense, he traveled the path in reverse. He started boom with enlightenment, and then he traveled the path, and the rest of his life was reporting on what happened. Now, he does describe elsewhere in a more detail this original opening, and here's what he says. When I kept knocking on God's door, I waited mindfully, not distracted, until there appeared to the eye the glory of his face, and nothing else. I encompassed being and knowledge. Nothing is in my heart but God. So this phrase, the glory of his face, you have to know this. Again, this is why to read them, you have to know something about Islam and so forth. It comes from the Quran, and it's used to describe what the glory of God's face burns everything up. That's why there are veils. If there were no veils, there would be no things. It's like it's too intense. So when you talk about the radicalness of the ultimate reality, it's like shining a light in a room full of little candles. The light goes on, and that's it, you know. So it's interesting that he described this as what happened to him. Appeared the glory of his face. So it burned up Ibn Arabi. Exactly that. And then there was nothing. There was only a call, and that was the call which Ibn Arabi followed for the rest of his life to report everything that he was given to shown. And then the last phrase, I must say, I don't speak Arabic, so and the commentary that I read doesn't make any doesn't comment on this. He says, I encompass being in knowledge. I'm giving you my belief of what it means. I believe it means the knowledge here is not conceptual knowledge, but the enlightenment knowledge, Janan or Marifa, is not a knowledge about one thing. I mean, it's not knowledge like, oh, okay, what is this? This is a gong striker. This is used to strike gongs. It's knowledge about the beingness of this and everything. So I don't learn anything extra about the function of a gong striker from enlightenment. I just learned what it really is, just like what this paper really is, just like what these glasses really are, just like what this computer screen really is, the beingness of it. Meister Eckhart, a great Christian mystic, called the isnness of everything. So the Buddhists call it suchness. That's another Buddhist term for it. So he encompassed being, all of being in knowledge. So anyway, notice though, he entered retreat. He waited mindfully, undistracted. Like Teresa Vila, the phrase he uses, there's nothing in my heart but God now. So, this idea, God lives in your heart. God's already there in your heart, not your physical heart, but your spiritual heart, the heart of everything, the heart of the core of your being. Another very common expression you find in different traditions. And then elsewhere in his work, all through his work, he used this metaphor of light, like Ayua used, and Lao Tzu, illumination, and so forth. Here's what he says, one example of that. When the star of the real rises and enters into the servant's heart, the heart is illuminated and irradiated. Then the bewilderment and fear disappear from the possessor of that heart, and he gives news of his Lord explicitly through hints and by means of various modes of reporting, which Ibn Arabi did for the rest of his life. I just read in a book that if you translated all his work into English and printed up to regular size books, it would fill 17,000 pages. 17,000 pages. Oh my God. Just poured through him. Okay. The fifth pointing then is that of 14th century Kashmir Yogini, Lali Shwari. Little is known about her life. What we have is these song poems. They're poems, but they're songs that are still sung apparently all over Kashmir, and they're popular, but they're spiritual. But there's no official version of them. You still find singers, just in the mountains and stuff, singing these things. And what we know about it, you have to glean from these poems. So know very little in detail, but apparently she was married young, and she had some deal with her husband about she could do her spiritual practice, and he broke the agreement, so she left him. This is very common in Hindu literature, by the way. She left him. Now she's free, and she wandered around Kashmir. She was like a mendicant, and she did finally find a guru, but she didn't join a monastery or anything. Just was on her own in that sense, and searching for the ultimate reality, which to her was Shiva, the god Shiva. So here's what she says about her path. For a long time, I wept and cried out for Shiva. I searched before me and behind me and below. But when at last I found him, I saw that he was not different from me. Then my heart became full, my seeking ended, and my understanding was complete. So, notice, like Teresa, her heart became full, her seeking ended, her path was complete. That was the end of her search. Yes, the sign was the end of her search. But elsewhere, she describes more detail how she actually found Shiva. And apparently she'd been doing these tantric and mantric practices. And by the way, I got to say here, the tantra, there's the complete misunderstanding in the West about tantra being tied with sexual practice and all about improving your orgasms or something, which is absolute nonsense. There are sexual practices in the tantric traditions of Northern India and Tibet and so forth, but they are part of a whole a body of practices that's really about converting ordinary life into the path through various rituals and things. There's nothing to do about improving your sex life or anything. And there's no, people do tantric practice and never do any sexual tantra. So it's just a small little portion of that. And if you are going to interested in doing sexual practice, you definitely need to find a qualified guru, a real one, not some charlatan, because it can be actually dangerous not to have that. I heard Tibetans say that doing sexual tantra is like a snake in a bamboo stick. It either goes up or it goes straight down. So there's no record that she's doing any sexual practices here. There are tantric practices, but she is probably doing various kinds of rituals and so forth. Anyway, she gets to the point where, probably through exhaustion, where this happens. She describes what happens. When tantra dissolves, the mantra remains. You know what mantra practice is like, repeating Om, Om, or some other mantra over and over. So when tantra dissolves, mantra remains. When mantra disappears, the mind remains. When the mind merges, nothing is left. The void merges into the great void. O Lali, there you also merge. O Lali, that void is nothing other than the supreme state free of thoughts. In that state, there's no knowledge, no meditation, no Shiva or Shakti. In that, all that remains is that. O Lali, you are that. So, like Teresa, she entered this state of emptiness, or samadhi, she calls it. But again, this is where lightning struck. But she didn't stay in that state. That state was a state. It's in time. It comes and goes, disappears. But what's left is now, she says, wherever I go, I see him. He is everything in the universe. So how can I be apart from him? And how could I exist without him? Oh, Lali, the drop became the ocean. And there's that other metaphor. The drop became the ocean. The river runs into the sea. The fountain returns to its source, common through all these traditions. See, again, these mystics are trying to reach for metaphors that will communicate this, and they come up with the same ones, even though they haven't read each other, but just naturally they come up with the same ones. All for regards to time, place, tradition, anything. You run into these all the time. So then finally, the sixth and final account is by Franklin Merrill Wolfe, a 20th century American mystic philosopher who had a great influence on a number of center teachers here, including myself. And Andrea, I don't think she's here. She lived with him for what, about 5 years as his caretaker and student. I lived there for a year and a half. Tom's deeply steeped in his writings and the philosophy and so forth. So we have a direct connection with Franklin. And so here's tell you a little bit about his background. His search took 25 years. If any of you feel like, oh, I've been searching a long time, depending on where you start the beginning of the search, but roughly 25 years. And he had many teachers and insights along the way, powerful insights and so forth. But he did not attain what he called recognition. That's his term for enlightenment. He also had desert experiences that he talked about, where he's kind of stuck between worldly life and spiritual life, where worldly life had kind of lost interest for him, but he hadn't attained the fruits of spiritual life yet. And so he just, he sort of had to force himself to go on. So he went through these dark night periods and whatnot. So again, this is very common on the spiritual path. But then finally, in the summer of 1936, here's what happened. He spent 3 weeks in Northern California. He lived in California, but his home was in Southern California, but he spent 3 weeks in Northern California, most of the time alone in the mountains, prospecting for gold and studying works about the great Hindu sage Shankara, who lived back in the 7th century AD. And but he considered Shankara his guru, even though he wasn't around in the flesh anymore. But he really got into Shankara and studied Shankara and studied Shankara and studied Shankara. So he's off alone in solitude, deeply, intensely studying Shankara. He's got time to meditate and think and whatnot. And he returned home and he said he was physically tired, been driving all night. And he was sitting on his porch. And then he described what happened next. Now, I'm going to read this to you twice, so relax. Don't try and grab everything onto everything I say the first time around. I never found it possible to completely silence thought. Now, let me stop there. That may be true of you. See, Teresa describes as self-emptying. Lali Shwari describes a state of deep samadhi. There's nothing. That was a thought-free state. He was very aware this is common in Hinduism, samadhi, but he was never able to do that. So if you're never able to do that, there's still hope for you, okay? I never found it possible to completely silence thought. So it occurred to me that success might be attained simply by a discriminative isolation of the subjective pole of consciousness, with the focus of consciousness placed upon this aspect. Further, I realized that recognition did not of itself imply a new experiential content in consciousness. I saw that genuine recognition as simply a realization of nothing, but a nothing that is absolutely substantial and identical with the self, the big self, true self. So here we nothing coming up again. Remember about nothing? Ibn Lao Tzu and Joseph ben Shalom of Barcelona, nothing. So this is very important because this is late, and this is after like 25 years. He realized, and he says elsewhere, I didn't read it because it's too long, but he says he'd been making a mistake all along, looking for some new experience in consciousness. But It's not about a new experience. We're always having new experiences. It's about something that's present all the time, but it's a nothing. That's why we don't see it, because we're always looking for a something. So recognition does not of itself imply a new experiential content in consciousness. I saw that genuine recognition is simply a realization of nothing, but a nothing that is absolutely substantial and identical with the self, capital letters. The final thought before the breakthrough was the very clear realization that there was nothing to be attained. For attainment implied acquisition, and acquisition implied change of content of consciousness. But the goal is not change of content, but divorcement from content. Thus, recognition has nothing to do with anything that happens. I am already that which I seek, and therefore there's nothing to be sought. By the very seeking, I hide myself from myself. Therefore, abandon the search and expect nothing. That was the final turn of the key that opened the door. I found myself identical with voidness, darkness, silence, but realized them as utter, though ineffable, fullness in the sense of substantiality, light in the sense of illumination, and sound in the sense of pure, formless meaning and value. Okay, let me read it one more time, and then we're going to fool around with this, okay? I never found it possible to completely silence thought, so it occurred to me that success might be attained simply by a discriminative isolation of the subjective pole of consciousness with the focus of consciousness placed upon this aspect. I can't tell you how to do it. I never heard of anybody who can tell you how to do it. You'll find this in all sorts of other literature, particularly like in Zen literature. They talk about, and Hinduism, they talk about returning the light of consciousness back on itself, going back to the source, turning it back. No one can tell you how to do it. So I'm sorry, but what's the pole of consciousness? We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a meditation instruction. But this is like, instead, we're always distracted by content of consciousness. But who's the one who's distracted? What is the subject of consciousness? That's the question. That's what we always overlook. Okay. I realized recognition did not of itself imply any new experiential content in consciousness. So if you're waiting for, the light bulb to go off or something, it's not going to happen. That's just a metaphor. No light bulb is going to go off. I saw that genuine recognition is simply a realization of nothing, but a nothing that is absolutely substantial and identical with the self. By the way, substantial is his term for ultimate reality, substantiality, ultimate reality. So this nothing, this is what he intellectually realized now. He's not awake yet, but he's intellectually getting it. So all this time I've been looking for a something, and it ain't no something, it's so nothing. So let me go see if I can find a nothing. And then this is really important. The final thought before the breakthrough was the very clear realization that there was nothing to be attained. For attaining implied acquisition, and acquisition implied change of content of consciousness. So this goes back to this thing. We're always looking for some new experience, some new something. Something's going to save me. But it's not about acquiring anything. It's about something else. We all spend our lives trying to acquire things to make us happy. It's never worked, has it? It makes you ultimately happy. It makes you a little happy. You get, a good meal, satisfies your hunger. So, but ultimately happy. We spend our whole lives acquisition. Wow. Doesn't work. Well, maybe we're barking up the wrong tree. Okay. But the goal is not change of content, but divorcement from content. So this is detachment. So it's like let whatever happens, let it happen. Let it go its own way. Let it do its thing. Don't worry about it. Don't get involved with it. Don't make up stories about it. Just and not push it away either. Ignore it. Just stop interfering. Thus, recognition has nothing to do with anything that happens. Nothing, you keep waiting for something to happen. It doesn't have anything to do with anything happening. I am already that which I seek, and therefore there is nothing to be sought. Now, again, he's not, this is intellectual insight. So it's guiding him in that sense, but this isn't awakening yet. There's nothing, I am already that which I seek. You see, that subject to consciousness is here already. It's not coming and going anywhere. It's that eternal nothing that Lao Tzu talked about, that we did with the gong, the no thing. So by the very seeking, I hide myself from myself. And you find this again. See, he discovered all this on his own. This was in 1936. He didn't have access to the great Buddhist material that we have, the Tibetan material, and so he's discovering this all on his own. By the very seeking, I hide myself from myself, because where's my attention? Where's my focus? I'm just distracted. I'm looking for my true self. It's silly. Rumi has a wonderful line in one of his poems about it's like a madman, running up to a mountain and yelling, "Where are you? Where are you?" And he hears the echoes coming back to him. And he's the one who's yelling, "Where am I? Where am I?" Anyway, okay, so therefore, abandon the search and expect nothing. Drop all expectations. This was the final turn of the key that opened the door. There's that metaphor of opening. That was the final turn of the key, that dropping the expectation. Just, I found myself identical with voidness, darkness, silence. He didn't become identical. Sometimes mystics talk about they become united with God and all that. But, that's not really accurate. You already are that. You've just realized it, that's all. Recognize it, to use his terms. I found myself identical with voidness, darkness, silence, but realized them as utter, though ineffable, fullness in the sense of substantiality, of reality. Light in the sense of illumination. There we go, these terms we've heard over and over. And sound in the sense of pure, formless meaning and value. Formless meaning and value, just the meaning and value of life, not of any particular, this has value or that has value. Just the whole thing, the whole enchilada. So I thought we'd try this as a guided meditation. Maybe, let's see, do we have time? Yeah, let's do that. Before we do this, if there are any questions about not about the whole talk, we'll have time for that a little later, but just about what Dr. Wolf said here, that maybe I can help shed a little light on the meditation we're about to start here. So if anybody has a question, I'm looking at, I don't see any hands raised here. Tom, do you see any raised hands?
Nope.
Okay, so we'll go on. All right, so to get comfortable, and I'm going to give you a little guided meditation. I'll ring the gong once to let us know it's starting and twice to let us know it's over. And let's see. Okay. So here we go. So begin by collecting your attention, focusing on your breath or whatever your meditation object is. Now let go of any effort to keep attention focused on your breath or meditation object. Just let attention go. And relax your body, your mind. Allow all phenomena arising and passing to do its thing. Just let them go. Now allow all phenomena, sights, sounds, tastes, sensations to slip into the background of awareness, to fade away. Still there, but place the awareness on the awareness itself, the awareness of all this phenomena. If you find there's nothing there, rest your attention on that nothing. Don't grasp at it. It's nothing. That's what it's supposed to be. Just keep resting attention on that nothing. And remember, recognition has nothing to do with anything that happens. You are already that which you seek. By the very seeking, you hide yourself from yourself. Therefore, abandon the search and expect nothing. So that was my talk for the morning. Any comments or questions?
My question was, when we were doing the meditation, and coming to emptiness, like as Andrea said, at the end of your breath, that exhalation and stuff, when the thoughts came up, then I just tried to watch them disappear, which was good, except that resting in that sense of emptiness doesn't seem like it's a very long rest. It feels like it's the thoughts are always kind of, just ready to come in line there. And that ability to kind of look past them and be in that sense of emptiness is, I guess I need to practice that more, because I'm not seeming able to do that. So
Okay, the last part you said to look past them.
yeah, to have the thoughts happening, but still kind of not having my attention going to them, just letting them be the river and flow by.
Exactly right. Exactly right. In fact, the Cloud of Unknowing, a great Christian mystic manual, the anonymous author, we don't know who it is, advises that just that. He says, it's like look over their shoulder, because you're not looking for thoughts, you're looking for the God behind them. And that's the God who resides in the darkness, the cloud of unknowing, out of which the thoughts come and go. So ignore them, just look over their shoulder. And then he says a very interesting thing. I love this. He says, you're going to feel like there's just darkness here. There's just nothing here. But learn to be at home in that darkness. And because our mind, are conditioned to just, oh, there's nothing here. There's nothing here. So I got to move on. This can't be right. But that's the whole point. It's completely counter the conditioning. So it just takes practice doing that.
Practice.
And then what Andrea said is true. You at the end of the breath, and you can start to taste that opening, that love, that surrender. And when you start to taste that will lead you. And you don't have to do anything. That's not effort at all. And it's not a matter of something you're doing. It's that beginning of that grace that's opening for you. So once you, and then you see it's the trouble has been making too much effort all along. It's not that you haven't been trying hard enough. It's been you've been trying too hard, but you've been distracted. And so the less distraction you have, the less effort there is, and the easier it becomes, and the more delightful it becomes. And that can be a great motivation. That can be that attraction that draws you.
Thank you. There's something about that doing too much, like, that judgment needs to be, besides not doing too much, that judgment of trying too hard needs to be let go for me, I think.
Yes, it does. All judgment.
Yeah.
It's a question of, it's a question of feeling it, and you're really in your body mind rather than thinking about it. You feel when it's getting easeful, and you feel when the practice is doing itself. I've said this over and over. In Buddhism, they talk about you turn the wheel of Dharma, Dharma turns you. So you let Dharma turn you, and you can actually just feel that. You just sitting like if you're doing the breath, you're like Andrea said, you don't even breathing. You're not even breathing. I mean, if you let it, the breath can take care of itself. You don't have to breathe all day long. Most of the time, you're not breathing. It's breathing you. Let it breathe. You don't have to do anything. Just where the attention is, and the letting go of all the distractions and all the grasping and all that. And it shows you. It reveals what it has to show you. You don't go yank the veil away and say, "Oh, I can see you now."
Hey, Joel.
How you doing?
I'm good. I'm up in Northern California at home right now.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that was a really beautiful talk, and a lot of it really resonated. And I guess I just had a question about the attachment or the trying to hold on to nothingness, because I feel like that's been happening a lot to me. And it's interesting that the initial insight is so obvious that there's nothing there to hold on to and there's no one to hold on to it. But then the mind creates an idea about the nothingness, and it becomes something that I can pretend will improve my life somehow, or will make me more respected, or I'll get all these things from it. And the more it seems like that non-experience is turned into a memory of something to hold on to, the harder it is to access the reality of it.
Yes, and you see, you already are seeing what's going on. You're just explaining back to me what's going on with you, so you can see it, so you know what's happening. So all you have to do is be aware of it as it's happening, and each one of those thoughts about, the thought that I shouldn't be doing, I should be holding on to this more. Oh, let that thought go. The thought that I shouldn't be holding on so hard, let that thought go. You see what I mean? See, this it's beyond all this good and bad. That's why Suzuki Roshi says this is beyond all those distinctions, good or bad experience. I should or shouldn't be doing this. But it's so you have to. What you have to do is see thought is just for the purposes of this practice. Thought is all the same. No matter what kind of thought, no matter what the content of the thought is, it's just thought. It's just thought, and it all behaves exactly the same way. It arises like the 10,000 things, and it passes away on its own. And all you have to do is notice that and let it do that. And anything else is extra. Anything else is a grasping, a pushing away, a trying to manipulate, and whatnot. So as long as the hardest part is to become aware of what the mind is actually doing. That's really the hard part. And then become aware of the conditioning of why it's doing it, because it thinks it's going to be happier. This all that's just more thought. So it's just you could think of it as already I'm giving you a thinking thing, but it's as a metaphor. It's like sinking into the present moment.
I was just feeling that even before you said it. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Okay. So you see, you don't need, you got your own wisdom. Follow that. Follow your own wisdom. What you see what's going on, and okay, you see what the obstacle is. Okay, let that go. It's practice. Practicing adjust, but without striving too hard. But still doing practice, but minimizing the effort gets less and less and less. The more you see, the more let's go, the more naturally it all happens. Trust. This is where we need trust and faith. Trust and faith in our own wisdom. Trust and faith in our own experience.
That's perfect. Yeah. Thank you for saying that.
Good.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to his head, but he's doing well on the path. See, now he's
don't say that.
Okay.
Thanks, Joel.
You're welcome.
It has to do with the word light, L-I-G-H-T, and it kept coming up in various ways, as you pointed out, the word light or inference to the word light and all the things that you said. And then I heard Robin laugh, and hi, Robin. And it struck me, there was a certain quality of lightness to that sound. And then it continued on, so whatever. And I thought, there's something about wanting to hold light that you can't do. I mean, that's what you're trying to say, is that there are some things you cannot do. You cannot hold on to something that cannot be held. Is that here? Are you hearing me?
Yes.
It's a question.
Yes.
But
th-
it's
yeah.
also a statement.
No, yes, I think you're absolutely right. You can't, there are things you cannot hold on. You cannot hold on to nothing. There's nothing to hold on to. Yeah. And yet nothing is the secret. I mean, the gateway to the secret of everything. So, and you can't hold on to, you can't get what you already have.
Yeah,
You know, when we used to meet together in our building and everybody's sitting on a chair, and I used to say, okay, there's one instruction nobody here can follow. I'd say, sit down. And nobody can do it. They're already sitting down. Well, this is the whole secret of the path. I'm sitting here and I'm giving all these instructions, and to wake up, it's silly. I mean, from one point of view, it's silly. Who's going to wake up? Yeah. Who, the person who's the awareness that's listening to me is it. You didn't lose it. Now, this is the paradox of the path, of course. And this is actually what I'm going to get to. It's a good segue into what I'm going to talk about. But yes, you're right. That's a very good thing to notice. Stop trying to grasp what you can't grasp. Stop trying to hold on to what you can't hold on to. Let go. That's it. You just start right there. Start letting go. Like Andrea said, it'd be a very good, thread to follow on a path. Pick one thing. Everything I'm holding on to, let me look at it. I can't hold on to it. Let it go. You can't take it with you, as we always say. Ellie. Hi, Ellie.
Mute. Oh, I'm unmuted now. I just want to say congratulations on the Light of Truth Day. I enjoyed the talk very much, and the banner that went on with it. I appreciate it all. Thank
Great.
you.
Great. Thank you, Ellie. You sound very chipper today.
Oh, well, that's kind of the result of taking part in this whole process.
Oh, great. I'm glad it's helpful.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, now both of you I have led to this last caveat, which is really important. It's important not to abandon the search prematurely. We've been talking about that all morning. That's just, you get to the point where you realize I am already that which I seek, therefore abandon the search. First of all, you can't abandon the search by an act of will. You can't say, oh, I understand that teaching, I'm going to abandon the search. That's just disguised searching. Because who's trying to abandon the search? You're still there trying to abandon the search. So you can't, it's important to understand, you can't abandon the search. The search, you need to keep practicing until you exhaust the practices, until you can't do them anymore. That's what prepares us for realization, for enlightenment. It's a yogi, 25 years, he understood at deeper and deeper levels intellectually, conceptually. He was a brilliant man, and he understood this stuff. And it worked for him following that path, because he started jettisoning things. Everything, he just jettisoned a whole bunch of practice. Or this is important. This is important. He focused down, but he had to go through that for 25 years to get there, to get to that point where he's a little tired from driving all night, and he's sitting on a porch and oh, what am I doing? I'm searching for something I already am. It's a realization that dawned on him. Boom, and then the heavens opened up. This he used to tell Andrea and me. So this is really important. You need to go through the fire of practice. Now, for some people, it's very short. Ramana Maharshi was just, a couple hours going through this death experience. That was the fire of practice for him. But he went through that. He went through the fire of that practice. Here's what Ibn Arabi says. When the vision of the real takes place, it only takes place in a mutual way station between an ascent and a descent. The ascent belongs to us, and the descent belongs to him. So it's like this idea of going up a mountain. You make this ascent, and when you get to the top of the mountain, you can't go any further. God makes the descent and meets you there. But as long as there's anything but the thinnest veil of ego, it's not going to happen. You keep going until you can't go any farther. And then your true self, God or whatever, does the rest. Does the rest. You don't even leave it up to the rest. He, she, it does the rest. In the meantime, and I'm going to leave you with these last words from Lali Shwari. Here's what she says. Sadhana, by the way, sadhana is a Hindu term, means a Sanskrit means practice. So you must bear the lightning and the thunder along the path. You have to endure the difficulties in the dark midnight of sadhana. It will be like being crushed to powder between grinding stones. But if you can endure it, O Lali, God will come looking for you, and happiness and contentment will welcome you home. So, happy Light of Truth Day. Don't forget, if you're interested in the foundation studies, contact David. Let him know you're interested. If you know anybody who's interested, let them know. You can always find David's email on our website under members and foundation studies practice. And we'll see if we have enough people to actually have a Zoom foundation studies this year. In the meantime, till we meet again, peace to you all.